Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and GameFound over the next week. And if you're new to the channel, we do this every week going over all the upcoming campaigns, so if you want to stay up to date, this is the place to be. But before we get started, I do like to go over some new announcements and discoveries that I just found out about. And I do have one that I think you might be interested in because there is a brand new game coming from Garfield Games. This one's going to be launching in June, but it might have a familiar name because this one is actually a complete re-implementation of a game that they did release previously, which is called Shipwrights of the North Sea. But this one is going to be more than just a few rules tweaks and minor changes. This one's actually a complete rewrite. The only thing that they're keeping here is the core mechanisms and the themes, and it's been completely reworked from the ground up. And of course, I will cover this in more detail in the week of its launch, so make sure to subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss out on that future coverage. Other than that, the LevelUp event is only about a month and a half away. I'll be attending this along with a ton of other great content creators and people from the community. If you're going, I really hope to see you there. Feel free to reach out to me on Discord and I'd be happy to try and meet up. But if you are considering it, I'd also like to try and save you some money. So I do have a discount code down below that'll get you $10 off any ticket that you purchase. And I did see a couple comments in my previous videos from a few of you saying that you will be going, so I'm excited to see you there. As always, I do like to give a quick shout out to Alex over at Board Game Co. because he does awesome work. You'll probably want to check him out if you haven't already. But also, Alex and I do work together keeping track of all these upcoming games. Each of us do track all of this info on our own, but we do sync up periodically just to make sure that we have the most comprehensive coverage and that the info is as up to date as possible. I do this each week, but Alex puts out a video at the start of the month giving you an idea of some of the big games that are to come, but he also puts out a ton of other videos as well. And you'll definitely want to check those out if you're interested in reviews or playthroughs or opinions on different games. And he also has great insight into which games he thinks will hold their value in the long run. But we do have quite a few games to cover this week, so we should probably get into them, so let's check them out. And the first campaign we have launches on May 29th, and this one's called The Lab, and this plays 3 to 6 players and takes about 30 to 45 minutes to play. And this one is a card game where players are going to be playing as scientists. And the goal of this game is to be the first scientist to cure 10 different infections. Whoever does that first wins the game. And the way this game works is that each player is going to be starting the game with some different treatment cards. And then each round you're going to be putting a number of infection cards out on the table equal to the number of players. And then each player is going to be drafting one of those infection cards that they're going to be trying to cure. Players will be playing cards from their hand in order to try and fulfill the requirements to cure that infection. And if they're able to do so, they're going to be marking one cured infection on their own personal player boards. But of course, you may not always have what you need to cure an infection. And if that's the case, the other players can try to help you by offering up some of their cards as well. But of course, they're not going to be doing this just out of the goodness of their heart, because if they do help you cure an infection, you get that cure, but then they also get to mark a cure on their player board as well. And although there is a chance that one of the other players might be willing to help, it's probably more likely that they'd rather get in your way because some of these cards do have take that elements, including some of the infections that you're curing, and when you do so, you can actually use those to perform some special effects that can harm the other players. Some cards can actually issue infections to the players, while other cards can issue complications. And if you get too many complications, that will turn into an infection as well. And if you get too many infections, you could be eliminated from the game unless another player wants to try and cure you. And if they're able to do so, then that gains them a whole bunch of cures, which helps get them a little bit closer to those 10 cures needed in order to win the game. And the first player that's able to do that wins. And if you're interested in this one, you can find links to the campaign in the description below. Launching on May 30th, we have a small card game called Match 'em Halloween, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 15 to 30 minutes to play. And this is a game for almost any age because this is a simple matching a memory game. We're going to have a bunch of cards face down on the table, and then players are going to be flipping them, trying to match the correct cards together. And when you do, you'll be able to take another turn until you are not able to match 2 cards, and then it would go to the next player. A couple things that makes this one a little bit different is that this one will have a Halloween horror theme, and it also can have different events that can occur throughout the game that can change the way that the game plays. And as always, if you want to learn more, I got links in the description below. Also launching on the 30th, we have Into the Godsgrave, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 60 to 120 minutes to play. And this one is a cooperative, app-driven narrative adventure where each player is going to be playing as their own asymmetrical hero with their own player board, where they're going to be tracking different gear and items that you might collect throughout the game. Players will also be starting with and developing different skills that you're going to be using to complete different skill checks. And this is all represented by dice of different colors, with each color representing a different skill. And of course, rolling a die of that color is going to going to be more helpful with that particular skill than rolling the other dice. The game does use a physical board, but then it's also going to be represented on the app as well. And of course, the app will be walking you through most of the narrative. It's also going to be providing you rules in order to set up the different scenarios and how those different tiles are going to be laid out with their different points of interest. Throughout the game, the app will also be presenting different challenges and options to the players, and depending on if they succeed or fail at those challenges or the decision that they made amongst those options, that will all be remembered within the app, and it will have consequences as the game moves forward. But the game does play over a series of rounds, and at the beginning of each round, all the players are going to decide collectively which one of their planning cards they want to put into play. The different planning cards will give different abilities as well as different resources that players will be able to utilize for that round. So you'll really want to pick one that you think will give you the best benefit depending on what you're trying to do that round. These cards also dictate how many movement points you'll get for that specific round, as well as how many action cards you'll get to draw into your hand. So these can also influence how quickly you move across the board or what sort of options you have available to you for your different actions. But after that card's chosen and the players have taken their resources and cards, play is essentially going to be alternating between the players as they take their movements and perform the different actions until they either choose not to perform any more actions or they are unable to do so. Each dual turn could have a player using their movement points to explore the main board, and then stopping on a location to interact with any of the monsters or points of interest that might be available there. Whenever you do that, you're going to be pulling up that same point of interest on the app, and that's going to provide any narrative and any options or skill checks that you'll have to go through for making that interaction. And even if it is a skill check, there could still be multiple options for how you want to go about completing that skill check, with each of them likely being correlated to a different skill, but then also having a different outcome and different ramifications further down the line. And you'll be rolling all your dice anytime that you resolve a skill check, even if the dice don't match the color of that specific skill, because each of the die will have generic successes on them that work for any color, but they will have additional successes matching only their color. That does make it easier if you do use the appropriate colored die. And of course, players do have their gear and their abilities, as well as those special action cards in order to manipulate the dice in their favor if needed. But the cards are actually multi-use, and before you do a skill check, you can actually discard any of your cards to gain an additional die, matching the color in the top right of that card. And of course, this die is only temporary, so you won't get to keep it, and you do have to discard that card in order to gain it, so it does come at a fairly significant cost. And if you are interested in this one, I think you can have a lot of confidence backing it, because Lucky Duck Games has already created a ton of app-driven games in the past with a ton of success. So they really know what they're doing there, and they do have a few really solid systems already figured out. And of course, you can check it out and learn more in the description below. Also launching on the 30th, we have Gold Nugget, and this plays 2 to 5 players. It takes about 15 to 25 minutes to play, and this one is a competitive bluffing game where players are trying to find a gold nugget hidden amongst many stones in a raven's nest. This is a campaign that I did think was launching a few weeks back, so I did already create some coverage for this one. So rather than going through it all again, I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And in this game, players are going to be playing as different animals, each with their own abilities. And the whole goal of this game is to try and find the golden nugget hidden within a raven's nest. The raven has currently left the nest, and it's safe to go investigate, and players will be starting the game by drawing 5 animal cards into their den, as well as 2 stones. Players will be using their cards to view, collect, and rearrange those stones, and generally just gather more information on where that golden nugget might be. These cards can also cause negative effects to the players, where you might be able to confuse them as to where that gold nugget is, or even plant raven feathers onto their den. There's periodic events that can happen throughout the game where the raven might fly overhead, and if you're caught with too many raven feathers on you, that raven's going to target you, which can set back some of your efforts. There's also a really interesting aspect of the game here that because all the players are animals, they also periodically need to sleep. And whenever a player sleeps, they're going to have to close their eyes, and that's an opportunity to miss out on the information that some of the other players might be doing. But essentially, players are trying to gather information and discover where that golden nugget is, and then try to track it throughout the game while preventing the same for your opponents. And at the end of the game, the raven's going to return, and all players are going to have to close their eyes, count to 3, and then open them and try to be the first to slap their hand on the stone that they believe is the golden nugget. If you got that right and you're the first person to have slapped it, then you are the winner of the game. Also launch on the 30th, we have the Apocalypse expansion for the Assassin's Creed Brotherhood of Venice. And this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 30 to 120 minutes to play. And if you're not familiar with this game, this is a cooperative stealth-based campaign game where players are going to be trying to complete different scenarios by achieving different objectives. And of course, there are some core mechanisms that all of these scenarios will follow, but each of them can play quite a bit different from each other, with them ranging from escort missions, assassinations, all the way to tower defense. And there are a whole bunch of different assassins that players can play as, each with their own unique special ability, as well as ability cards that can only be used once per scenario that you can actually upgrade and expand as you move throughout the campaign. And you can also equip them with different gear and items that also carry forward into the future scenarios. Players will be taking turns spending their action cubes to do things like move around on the modular board, attack enemy units, or even perform special actions and search for equipment. But like I said, this is a stealth-based game, and at the start of the game, you're going to be completely invisible to the enemies, but each time that you enter a tile that has an enemy, you're going to have to roll a die to determine how alert they are of your presence. After all the players have performed their actions, the enemies will then get an activation, and then depending on how alert they are of the players, more and more of them could spawn out on the board. Getting discovered does make the game considerably more difficult as more and more enemies will be getting in your way, eventually to the point where you will end up losing because you just won't be able to deal with it. But it's not necessarily a bad thing if you are able to escape quick enough, but it is also something that you can expect to happen from scenario to scenario, as assassinations tend to rarely go unnoticed. But the new expansion is going to be taking players to a completely different part of the world in the Cambodian jungle, and it's going to be introducing all sorts of new enemies, new weapons, and new events and mechanisms that players can try to use to their advantage. And one of the biggest changes with this one is that this one does venture into a more open world type game, as there's going to be a sort of overworld map that you'll be able to traverse, and then decide which memories you want to jump into, then activating that scenario. And this one is not a standalone expansion, even though this game and the original could be played completely independent of each other. But in order to keep costs down for the people that already own the original game, this game does share components with the original release, so you will need the original box if you do want to venture into the expansion content. And of course, they both will be offered in this campaign, so if you want to check them out, I have links in the description below. Also launching on the 30th, we have Conquest Princess Fashion is Power, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 40 to 75 minutes to play. And this one is another cooperative game, but in this one, players are crew on a ship, and each of the players are going to have some different strengths and abilities that are unique to them. But essentially, players are going to be trying to defend their ship, all while trying to complete different objectives for whatever scenario that you are trying to complete. And there's all sorts of scenarios offered in the game, but essentially players are going to be starting out on their main ship, which has a bunch of different modules that can help players in different ways, whether it's seeing what sort of enemy attacks are upcoming, or even gaining special items or abilities that you can use later in the game. The ship also has a teleporter that you can use to move your characters to the other game boards that each have their own puzzles that players will be trying to solve, and you can move around on those boards and attack the enemies there to manipulate those boards in different ways. Whenever a player performs an attack action, they're going to be drawing an attack token from the draw bag that's going to dictate the outcome of that attack, whether it was a hit or a critical fail or something in between. And an interesting thing here is that whatever you draw actually stays in play, depleting the available options from the bag, but you can also perform different actions to put new tokens into that bag, adding a sort of bag building element. And as I said, each of the scenarios can have some different objectives that you're trying to complete, but in the scenario that I was able to review, players were trying to gather dice from all the different areas and boards available in the game by manipulating different elements and attacking different enemies, but then taking those dice in order to solve puzzles. Then you could use those dice to fill up columns and rows, which would unlock you new abilities, but then also help achieve your overall objectives. And like I said, you will be getting attacked by enemies as you're trying to do all this, and anytime that you take too much damage, you're going to be discarding cards from your power-up deck, and anytime that that runs out, players will automatically lose the game. But that's not the only way you can deplete that deck, because there's also opportunities for players to take those power-up cards in order to gain their benefit at the cost of removing one more card from that deck. So players might want to take advantage of that, but only when the benefit outweighs the cost. And if you do want to know more about this one, I do have links to the campaign in the description below. And of course, you can follow along to get notified and also get a free gift added to your pledge. Also launching on May 30th, we have Monsters of Loch Lomond, and this plays 2 to 5 players. It takes about 15 to 45 minutes to play, and this one is a competitive card game where each player is a leader of a Scottish clan, and players are competing to build their clans and drive off monsters. And the way this game works is that each player is going to be dealt 4 cards face down on the table in front of them, but then each player will be able to look at just 2 of their cards. You can only do this once at the start of the game, so you're going to have to remember what cards those were and where they were placed. Some of those cards will be monsters that you're trying to get rid of, while the others will be clan members of varying values. And the whole goal here is to try and be the first player to get rid of all your monsters and to have the lowest sum of values. And in order to do this, players do have a few actions they can perform on their turn in order to manipulate those cards in front of them. And the first option that players have is to draw a card from the shared deck. And whenever you do that, you can look at the card and then you can decide if you want to swap it with one of your cards, or if you just want to simply discard that card into a face-up discard pile, activating its special ability. And the other option that players can perform is, instead of drawing a card from the main deck, they can instead draw from the top of the discard pile, but whenever you draw a card this way, your only option is to swap it with one of your cards. Something to note here is that anytime that a player puts a card into the discard pile, any of the players at the table can yell the word "shoo," and the first player to do that is allowed to discard any of their cards that match the card that was put into the discard pile. But if the card that they end up discarding is not the right card, that's actually going to work against them, because instead of discarding a card, they're actually going to be gaining an additional one. And the game continues like this until a player believes that they have no more monsters in their cards and that they think they have the lowest total sum. Whenever they do that, they can call the end of the game, and then all the other players will get one more turn, and then players reveal their cards, and the player with the lowest sum of cards, while also not having any monsters, wins the game. And also launching on the 30th, we have Point Masters, and this one is a simple party game where at the start of the game, each player is going to have a direction card in each of the 4 directions. And then each round there's going to be a lead player, and that player is going to be counting down from 3 and saying go. And then all the players are going to be choosing one of their 4 direction cards and then slapping it down on the table as fast as they can. Any of the cards that match the same direction of the lead player is going to grant points towards that lead player. The role of the lead player will be passed to the next player each and every round, and the first player to get a certain amount of victory points wins the game. But the thing that makes this game interesting is that there are also chaos cards that players can gain throughout the game, and you can use these at any point to block points to players or to try and get those points yourself, and generally just harm the other players and help yourself in all sorts of different ways. And if you're interested in this one, I do have links to the campaign in the description below. Also launching on the 30th, we have the next campaign from Unstable Games, who created all sorts of party games like Unstable Unicorns, as well as Here to Slay and Casting Shadows. But one thing to note about this publisher is that they don't really release too much information before their campaign launches, so I don't really have too much here to explain how this game works. But each of their games always has some really cute artwork, and this one is going to be a deck building game, and players are going to be summoning elemental warriors like Twig, Leaf, Droplet, and Pebble factions in order to go head to head against their rival sages. This one does have deck building, which is a little bit more in-depth than your typical party game, so I'm really interested to see what they came up with. But if you want to know more, you'll have to check out the campaign, which I have linked in the description below, because that's all the information I have at this time. And another really quick one here for you, launching on the 30th, is The Damned. And I'm just going to cover this one briefly because it's not a board game, but this one is offering a new range of detailed multi-part hard plastic post-apocalyptic sci-fi miniatures. So if you're interested in that one, you can check it out. And of course, if you want to know more, I do have this one linked in the description below. And also launching on the 30th, we have Rocky Roid, and this plays 1 to 6 players. It takes about 10 to 30 minutes to play. And this one is a competitive roll and write where players are going to be mining asteroids and then trying to sell them to a shared market. 3 dice are going to be rolled every single round, and then players are going to have to choose 2 of those 3 dice in order to decide where to move and then what asteroid they're going to find there. Players will optionally be able to spend any resources that they've accumulated so far in order to manipulate the dice in their favor. Players will be able to control how long they spend mining these asteroids, and of course the longer you spend there, the more minerals you'll gain. But players will only be able to sell the minerals they've collected one at a time in the order that they arrived home, with each sale reducing the price for all the other players. So you don't want to spend too long mining the asteroids because it means that you're going to be selling at the lowest price. The game also offers all sorts of different maps, with each of them offering some slightly different rules, adding a little bit of variability from game to game. So if you are interested in this one, you can check it out. I have links in the description below. Also launching on the 30th, we have Studium No Exit, and this plays 1 to 5 players and takes about 120 minutes to play. And this one is a cooperative dungeon crawler that is inspired by tabletop role-playing games. Players will be playing as their own individual characters with their own abilities that they'll be able to upgrade and evolve throughout the game. Then you're going to be navigating through a gothic horror fantasy campaign. Players will be using dice rolling in combination with their skills in order to resolve combat and different skill checks throughout the game, and players will be able to craft powerful equipment by using the resources that they find within the Studium. The game offers an overall narrative that's also going to be intertwined with your own personal character's development, and the decisions you make along with your successes and failures will have consequences in the way that the story unfolds. And if you do want to know more about this one, you can check it out. I have links in the description below. Also launching on the 30th, we have another campaign that I don't have a ton of info on, so I'll just give you the information that I do have. But this one is for the Reversed Front, Dear Revolutionaries, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 40 to 80 minutes to play. And this one is a war game that focuses on the different struggles and powers that all revolve around the Chinese Communist Party. In this game, some players will be playing as revolutionaries, while others could be playing as the Taiwanese government, or even the Red Army who is defending the Communist Party. But this game offers 9 different powers that players can play as, each with their own strengths and weaknesses and goals that they're trying to achieve. This means that even if you play this game multiple times, your strategy can change quite a bit depending on the power that you're playing as, but then also depending on the powers that your opponents are playing as. And that's pretty much all the info I have on this one right now, so if that little bit of info sounds interesting to you and you want to know more, you can check it out. I have links in the description below. And launching on May 31st, we have King Tian, the Legend of Immortal Killers. And this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 60 to 180 minutes to play. And this one is a cooperative legacy game, but this one is pretty interesting because each of the scenarios in this game is going to be offering you a unique pop-up map. Players are going to be embarking on quests in order to defeat powerful gods, and anytime that players defeat a monster, they're going to be acquiring jade, which they can then spend later in order to upgrade their gear, totems, or gain additional cards into their own unique decks. Each character in this game is going to come with their own set of martial arts cards that players are going to be using to engage in combat, and each of these characters is also going to follow one of 5 different styles of combat with their own unique set of abilities, strengths, and weaknesses. Each round, players are going to be playing their martial arts cards to perform various actions, but the order that the characters get to play between the enemies and the characters is going to be determined by their initiative values. As players play throughout the campaign, they'll be unlocking new components that they can use to augment the different maps as well as their martial arts cards in order to customize the game to their unique playthrough. And although this game does primarily focus on the card combat, players will also be discovering different secrets and conspiracies throughout the narrative that the game provides. And if you are interested in this one, you can check it out. I got links in the description below. Now launching on June 1st, we have Micro Architects, and this plays 1 to 4 players. It takes about 30 to 60 minutes to play. And this one is a city building game where players are going to be playing over 3 rounds, and each round there's going to be 2 goals that players are trying to complete, and you're going to have scoring at the end of each of these rounds. Each round you're also going to be setting up 2 different rows of buildings, and on a player's turn they'll be able to draft one of those buildings from those rows, starting with the top row, and once that row is completely depleted, then players can start drafting from the lower row. And whenever a player drafts a building, they're going to be adding it to one of the regions on their own personal player boards, of course trying to create different patterns to fulfill the different objectives of the game. But each of the black buildings are known as landmarks, and anytime that you draft one of those buildings, you're going to be choosing one of the landmark cards to assign to that building. Each of the landmark cards are unique and have different preferences that can score you points in their own way if you're able to fulfill those requirements. But as the players are placing buildings onto their own personal player boards, they're going to be hitting different milestones that allow them to move boats onto their board. Whenever you gain a boat, it moves onto the river onto the center of your board, and you'll be able to move that boat up the river in order to gain specific goal cards that will only affect you. You'll be able to keep these goal cards for the entirety of the game, but you will be scoring them at the end of each round. A round ends once all the buildings are taken, and then you're going to be randomly drawing more buildings to set up the next round. And the game continues like this until the end of 3 rounds, and the player with the most victory points wins the game. But players will also be gaining different action tokens throughout the game that they can spend to perform some special abilities, like exchanging different buildings for other buildings or moving buildings around on their own personal player boards. And if you're interested in this one, you can check out the link in the description below. Also launching on June 1st, we have Chroma Mix, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 30 to 45 minutes to play. And this one is a really interesting deck builder because not only does it incorporate traditional deck building, it also incorporates color theory. So not only can you add more cards to your deck, you can also mix your cards together to create new cards. Each player is going to be starting out the game with just a cyan, a magenta, and a yellow card. And then on a turn, you can either play a card to perform its action, mix cards in your hand to discard those cards and then gain a new, more powerful card, or you can return any cards that you currently have in play back into your hand. Each of the cards that you can acquire are going to have some sort of requirement outlined on them, letting you know which cards you need to mix together in order to form that card. This creates a really powerful deck builder because not only are you getting a more powerful card, but you're also slimming down your deck by getting rid of those cards that you used to create it. And the game offers 3 different ways that you can win the game. You can either be the first player to gain 17 victory points, or you can be the first player to play a blue card when you have at least 16 cards in your hand, or you can be the first player to play a red card when you have both a blue and green in your hand or in play. The first player to do any of those wins the game, and if you want to check it out, I got links in the description below. That's everything I have for you this week, but don't leave yet because we do have a giveaway to announce. And this one is going to be for Asteroid Dice, the giant throw and collide squishy dice game. And the way that this game works is that each player is going to have a hand of cards that has a die on it as well as a victory point value. Each round, players are going to be choosing one of those cards to put into play, and then they're going to be rolling the die depicted on the card. And then whoever rolls the highest value gets to take all those cards, essentially earning all those victory points. But if 2 players play a card that require them to roll the same die, they're going to be racing to try and grab that die first, because whoever is able to throw it at their opponent and hit them first is the one who gets to use that. Then the other player would have to choose to roll one of the die that were left unchosen. Of course, rolling a d20 gives you a much higher chance of rolling a higher value than, say, rolling a d6, so certain dice are more desirable than others, but you do always have a chance, even with one of the underdog dice, that you could still come out on top. And this giveaway is going to be for the Kickstarter edition pledge. And to enter this giveaway, all you have to do is check out our link to the Discord in the description below, head over to the giveaways channel and click the little emoji underneath that giveaway. That'll get you entered into the draw, which will be automatically drawn at the end of the week. And I've been a little behind on reaching out to publishers, so this is the only giveaway that I have this week, but let's go ahead and draw the winner from last week. And the giveaway for last week was for a pledge for Disrupt, which you can go ahead and check out on Kickstarter now. And to draw a winner, I use this application here. All these extra names down here are bonus entries for my Patreon subscribers. If you like this sort of content and want to help make all these efforts just a little bit more sustainable for me, I do honestly appreciate it. I don't take any money from publishers in any way, shape, or form. I don't even take games from them. In fact, the whole reason I started these giveaways is because I was offered games, but then rather than taking them for myself, I decided, hey, why don't I just offer them as giveaways on the channel and someone else can get them. And if you're not interested in the Patreon, that's perfectly fine as well. But if you do think I deserve it, I do appreciate a like and subscribe on these videos. It does help to get more exposure and to help these videos get suggested for more people that might like it. And it is a great free way for you to support the channel. But let's go ahead and draw those comments and draw a winner. And the winner of Disrupt is Joseph Sanko. And this is one of our Patreon subscribers. So congratulations, Joseph. I'll reach out to you and let you know that you won yourself a pledge for Disrupt. And that is everything I have for you this week. And as usual, it's been a crazy busy week for me. I feel like I say this every single week. I feel like I'm perpetually in the mode that things will slow down, but they never do. For those of you that watch my previous videos, you know that I've been on the house hunt and it's been absolutely terrible. It also is just that time of year where the market does get pretty hot, so I might just have to be patient with this one, which is too bad because I just got my board game table in the mail and I'm excited to set it up in a place that I actually have room for it. But on a positive note, it is summertime and the living's easy. So thanks so much for watching, and until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.
all.